Welcome to Lost at Sea Tales, where we dive into the haunting stories of ships, sailors, and voyages swallowed by the vast, unforgiving ocean. Each tale uncovers mystery, tragedy, and survival against the endless deep. Settle in as we journey into the chilling history of those forever lost at sea. What? HMS Hampshire, 1916, WWII Diary of Survivor, Seaman William Brown, June 5, 1916, Orkney.
Scotland.
The storm had been with us all day, a bitter howling wind that cut straight through oilskins and froze the marrow in your bones. The sea boiled like a cauldron, waves smashing against the Hampshire's hull, spraying us with salt that stung the eyes and cracked our lips. We had been ordered to sail, despite the gale, carrying the most important passenger in Britain. Lord Kitchener himself, the Empire's great war minister. There was pride in the air, but beneath it, fear too. We all knew sailing in such weather was courting disaster. Night was falling when it happened. I had just finished a watch, my hands numb and raw, when a sound like the earth itself tearing apart thundered from beneath us. The ship jolted violently, steel shrieking as if it had been wrenched open by a giant's fist. A German mine. The blast threw men from their feet, smoke and fire filling the air. Attic erupted instantly. The Hampshire began to list, water rushing in fast. The captain shouted orders, but his voice was drowned by the storm and the screaming. Men scrambled for lifeboats, but most were smashed against the ship or overturned before they even touched the water. I remember seeing one filled with men crash into the waves, only to be swallowed whole before it cleared the side. I ran to the rail, heart pounding, and hurled myself into the sea. The shock of the cold almost killed me then and there. It stole the breath from my lungs and made my muscles seize like iron. Around me, men flailed and shouted, only to vanish beneath the waves one by one. Lightning lit the chaos, faces pale with terror, wreckage bobbing, the black outline of the Hampshire slipping beneath the sea. Managed to grab a floating plank, clinging until my fingers bled. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes, as the storm tossed me about like driftwood. Eventually, a handful of us were pulled from the water. Just 12. Hundreds had gone down, including Kitchener himself. Even now, I can still hear their voices in the wind, calling from beneath the waves. 2. HMH's Britannic, 1916, WWII, Diary of Nurse Margaret Lowe, November 21st, 1916. Aegean Sea. I had served aboard the Britannic for weeks, tending to wounded soldiers bound for home. She was a magnificent ship, painted white with great red crosses along her hull. Surely, we thought, no one could mistake her for a vessel of war. She was a lifeline, a healer. The sea itself seemed calmer when we sailed. But that morning, as the sun climbed into a pale sky, a thunderous blast shattered our faith. I was in the ward with patients when the ship lurched violently, throwing beds and men across the room. Dust and smoke filled the air. We had struck a mine, or worse, been torpedoed. Screams echoed through the corridors. I rushed above deck, helping the wounded as best I could. The ship was already listing. I saw lifeboats being lowered too soon, the engines still turning beneath the water. In horror, I watched helplessly as 2 lifeboats drifted straight into the propellers. The blades caught them like toys, wood-splintering bodies flung apart, the sea frothing red. The screams still tear through my sleep. The captain ordered abandon ship. I helped strap a wounded man into a lifebelt, then jumped myself. The water was freezing, dragging me down, my skirts heavy, my lungs screaming for air. Somehow I surfaced, gasping, coughing, thrashing against the swell. Around me, debris floated, broken wood, mattresses, wounded men clinging to anything that would hold them up. Within an hour, the Britannic was gone, her mighty hull swallowed by the Aegean. Over 1,000 of us survived, but 30 souls never saw land again. 30 might seem small compared to other tragedies, but I remember each face. I remember how a ship meant to save became a tomb in minutes. 3. RMS Lusitania, 1915, WWII Diary of Passenger. Thomas Quinn, May 7, 1915. Off the coast of Ireland, the Lusitania was a floating palace. Children played in the passageways. Women in fine dresses strolled the decks. Men smoked and laughed over cards. Though the war raged across Europe, there was still an air of comfort on board. We believed we were safe, that a passenger liner was no target, We were wrong. I was on deck when I saw it. The white streak cutting through the waves toward us. "A torpedo," shouted, but before the words left my lips, it struck. The explosion was deafening, hurling me to the deck. The ship shuddered, tilted, and began to die. Panic consumed us. Mothers clutched screaming children. Men fought to reach lifeboats. But the list was so severe the boats on one side swung uselessly, while those on the other smashed against the hull as they were lowered. I tried to help a woman and her child into one, but it tipped violently, spilling them into the sea. Thea cries haunt me. The Lusitania sank in just 18 minutes. I leaped into the Atlantic. The cold so fierce I thought my heart would stop. Round me floated wreckage, lifebelts, and bodies. So many bodies. The cries for help rose, then fell, as the ocean silenced them one by one. I clung to a piece of timber, numb, praying for rescue. When at last I was hauled aboard a fishing boat, I looked back at the empty horizon and realized nearly 1,200 souls were gone. Civilians, children, families. It was no battlefield, but war had claimed them all the same. 4. USS Juneau, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Charles Adams, November 13, 1942. Near Guadalcanal, the sea was quiet after the battle, but our nerves were not. We had just survived a brutal fight near Guadalcanal, and though battered, the Juneau steamed on. Among us were the Sullivan brothers, 5 lads from Iowa who stuck together no matter what. They lifted spirits, always laughing, always side by side. Then the torpedo struck. A violent shudder tore through the ship. An instant later, a second explosion ripped her apart. One moment, I was on deck. The next, I was in the sea, ears ringing, lungs burning, oil stinging my skin. When I surfaced, the Juneau was gone, swallowed whole. Hundreds of us clung to wreckage. The ocean was slick with fuel, the air thick with smoke and cries for help. The sun scorched by day, the cold gnawed by night. Worst of all were the sharks. They came in the dark water, circling, then striking without warning. Men vanished with a scream and a splash dragged beneath. I can still see the water churning red. We waited for rescue, but none came. Ours turned into days. The sun blistered our skin, our tongues swelled from thirst. Men began to hallucinate, babbling, some slipping quietly into the water, never to surface. One by one, faces disappeared. After 8 days, just 10 of us were alive, out of nearly 700. The Sullivans were gone, all 5 of them, taken by war and sea alike. I was saved, but the guilt remains. Survival is not victory. It is a burden. 5. Wilhelm Gustloff, 1945, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Greta Fischer, January 30th, 1945. Baltic Sea. The Wilhelm Gustloff was supposed to be our salvation. 9,000 souls crammed aboard. Soldiers, nurses, mothers, children. The air was suffocating, corridors jammed with bodies, the ship heavy with despair. We were fleeing the Red Army, each of us carrying little more than fear. When the torpedoes came, there was no warning. The first blast knocked me from my feet, screams erupting around me. The second tore through the hull. The third sent water rushing in. Lights flickered, then died. Darkness and panic ruled. I clutched my daughter's hand, dragging her toward the deck. People surged like a tide, crushing one another in desperation. I heard children screaming for their mothers, mothers calling for their babies, voices drowned by chaos. The deck was slick with ice, the wind cutting like knives. Lifeboats swung wildly, too few, too slow. We jumped. The cold was beyond pain, a force that seized the body and refused to let go. My daughter's hand slipped from mine. I screamed her name until my throat was raw, but the sea swallowed her, merciless and final. All around me, the water was filled with people, thrashing, crying, then falling silent as the cold claimed them. In less than an hour, the Gustloff was gone, taking more than 9,000 with her. I lived, but only in body. The sea took my child, my hope, my future. I carry her face in my dreams, and in every wave I hear her call. The world will call it war. But for me, it was the night the ocean stole my soul. 6. HMS Royal Oak, 1939, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Stoker James Mitchell, October 14, 1939, Scapa Flow, Scotland, it was supposed to be safe. Scapa Flow was the Navy's fortress, the great anchorage where no enemy dared to strike. We believed we were untouchable, anchored deep in the still black waters. The war had barely begun, but we told ourselves the Royal Oak would weather it all. She was a mighty battleship, built of steel and pride, was below deck when the first explosion thundered. At first, we thought it a minor accident, some mishap in the magazines. But moments later, another blast tore through the hull, violent enough to send us sprawling. Alarms screamed, men shouted, smoke and fire surged through the passageways. We knew then the enemy was here, a German U-boat in our very stronghold. The ship began to list, water rushing in through torn steel. The smell of fuel and smoke filled my lungs, choking me as I stumbled through the narrow, tilted corridors. Men were trapped, banging on watertight doors, their voices growing fainter as the sea rose. I will never forget those sounds. When the order came to abandon ship, it was already too late for many. I scrambled up onto the deck, the night air sharp with cold. The sea was aflame with oil, men thrashing in the dark water. I jumped, the icy shock stealing my breath, and swam until my muscles screamed. Behind me, the Royal Oak rolled onto her side and vanished, dragging more than 800 men with her. I was one of the few pulled from the freezing water, but I can still feel the weight of all those left behind, still hear their pounding fists in the dark. Scapa Flow was supposed to be safe. That night the sea proved nowhere was safe. 7. Arisen Maru, 1944, World War II. Diary of Survivor. POW Corporal David Harrington, October 24, 1944. South China Sea. We were packed like animals in the hold of the Arisen Maru. Over 1,700 Allied prisoners crammed into darkness, the air thick with sweat, urine, and despair. The Japanese guards gave us little food, less water. We were weak, starving. Our bodies, nothing but bone and sores. Yet in that stinking dark, we clung to one another, whispering of home, of freedom, of survival. Then came the explosions. First muffled, distant, then one struck true. The ship shuddered, iron screaming, the lights flickering out. Chaos erupted. Men screamed in every tongue, clawing for the hatches. We knew what had happened. An American submarine had torpedoed us, never knowing their own countrymen were aboard. The hatches were locked, beat on the steel doors, our fists raw, our voices hoarse. Men clawed at the walls, biting, tearing at anything to escape. I can still hear the sound of fingernails raking down metal, desperate and futile. Slowly, the hold filled with water, the black sea rising around our legs, our chests, our throats. Somehow, in the madness, I forced my way through a gap as the ship broke apart. I surfaced into a night filled with fire, wood splinters, and bodies. I clung to wreckage, coughing, gasping, listening to the screams fade into silence. Out of 1,781 prisoners, only 9 of us survived. I lived, but at the cost of leaving nearly every friend I had to die locked in the dark. Survival felt less like triumph, more like betrayal. Montevideo Maru, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Engineer's mate Samuel Lee, unofficial account. July 1st, 1942, South China Sea. They herded us aboard the Montevideo Maru with rifle butts and curses. More than 1,000 Allied prisoners and civilians packed into the bowels of a Japanese freighter. The heat below deck was suffocating, the air sour with sweat and sickness. We tried to keep hope alive, singing hymns in the dark, whispering of wives and children. But deep down, we knew the sea was already sharpening her claws. On July 1st, the torpedoes came, fired by the USS Sturgeon, who had no idea their target was filled with their own allies. The explosions ripped through the hull, fire and smoke filling the air. Panic surged as the ship began to list, water pouring in. The guards fled. We were left locked in the hold like cattle for slaughter. Men screamed, clawed, and prayed as the water rose. I'll never forget the sounds, fists pounding on iron, voices begging in the dark. Some tried to force the hatches. Others simply gave up, closing their eyes, whispering names of loved ones as the sea claimed them. I found a way through a smashed vent and crawled toward the deck. When I surfaced, the sea was littered with bodies and wreckage, but few living souls. The ship slipped beneath the waves, dragging more than 1,000 with her. The worst maritime loss in Australia's history. I survived, though no official record remembers me. I live with the guilt of knowing I escaped while almost everyone else was swallowed by the sea. 9 USS Indianapolis, 1945, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Radioman 2nd Class George Miller, July 30th, 1945. Philippine Sea. The war was nearly won. We had just delivered the parts for a secret weapon, one we were told would end it all. Spirits were high as we cut through the dark Pacific, heading for home. Then, at midnight, 2 torpedoes struck. Indianapolis groaned, shuddered, and broke apart in minutes. I was thrown into the sea, oil slick burning my eyes and throat. Around me, hundreds of men clung to rafts or wreckage, bobbing in the swells. At first, we were hopeful. We thought rescue would come quickly. But the hours passed, and days. The sun scorched by day, blistering our skin. At night, the cold cut deep. Men drank seawater, their minds unraveling, some swimming away, convinced they saw islands that weren't there. Others simply gave up, slipping beneath the waves without a sound. But worst of all were the sharks. They circled, waiting. We saw fins cutting the water, then heard the screams as men were dragged under, blood turning the sea crimson. I huddled with a small group, clinging to a raft. We took turns watching the water, praying, whispering, trying to keep madness at bay. But each sunrise revealed fewer faces. By the time a plane spotted us, only 316 of nearly 1,200 remained. I lived, but the sea still whispers their names. At night, I see the eyes of the sharks glowing beneath me, waiting for the moment my strength gives out. 10. SS Athenia, 1939, World War II. Diary of Survivor, passenger Eleanor Hughes. September 3, 1939. Off the coast of Ireland, war had just been declared that very day. We were civilians, ordinary people on the Athenia, bound for Canada to escape the storm we felt coming. Some said we'd be safe at sea, that no German captain would dare strike a passenger ship. We wanted to believe it. But that evening, as the sun sank, the ocean proved otherwise. The torpedo struck with no warning. Ship shook violently, glass shattering, people thrown to the floor. Panic swept through the decks like fire. Mothers clutched children, men shouted for lifeboats, the crew fought to calm the chaos. I remember the smell of smoke, the tilt of the deck, the cries rising into the night. I helped lower a lifeboat, my hands trembling, my breath shallow with fear. People scrambled aboard, some falling into the sea in desperation. I climbed down the rope, slipping my skirts heavy, nearly falling into the black water before I tumbled into the boat. We rowed away, watching as the Athenia listed, her lights flickering, her hull groaning like a wounded beast. She did not sink quickly, but slowly, agonizingly, her decks vanishing beneath the waves. Around us floated debris, lifebelts, and the cries of those who hadn't made it. That night, more than 100 civilians died, the first victims of the war at sea. I survived, but the image of that great liner slipping under still haunts me. The war had only just begun, and already the sea was stained with innocent blood. 11 HMS Hood, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor, dead. Briggs signalman. I had been proud to serve aboard HMS Hood. She was no ordinary warship. She was the ship. The mighty Hood. Every boy in Britain who dreamed of the sea dreamed of her. She was massive, sleek, the pride of the Royal Navy, a symbol of strength. To be assigned to her was an honor, and I wore that honor like a badge. When the orders came to intercept the German battleship Bismarck, the crew buzzed with energy.
Ow.
We knew the Bismarck was dangerous, but there was no doubt in our minds that the Hood and the Prince of Wales could match her. On the morning of May 24, 1941, in the cold gray waters of the Denmark Strait, we prepared for battle. I was at my post on the compass platform, wrapped in my greatcoat against the Arctic wind. The sea was restless, the clouds heavy and low, as if nature itself was holding its breath. At dawn, we spotted them. Bismarck and Prinz Eugene, silhouettes against the distant horizon. The order came. Open fire. Hood's great 15-inch guns thundered, the deck shuddering beneath me. The sound was so loud it rattled my bones. We all knew this was it, the enemy answered. I could see the muzzle flashes across the water, faint against the morning gloom. Then came the sound, the whistling roar of incoming shells. They screamed through the air monstrous things before crashing into the sea around us, sending up geysers of water higher than our masts. The shockwaves rattled our teeth, but the Hood pressed forward, proud and defiant. The first salvos missed. But the fourth, I'll never forget the fourth. There was a flash, a blinding, hellish flash from deep within the ship. It wasn't just an explosion. It was as though the world had been ripped apart. A shell from Bismarck had plunged into our magazines. In an instant, the Hood's heart detonated. Fire, smoke, and steel erupted upward with a roar louder than anything I had ever heard. The whole ship seemed to leap out of the sea, her back breaking, flames shooting skyward. The force hurled me across the compass platform. I remember heat on my face, searing pain as shards of steel sliced past me. For a moment I was deaf, blind, disoriented. When I came to, everything around me was chaos. Men were screaming, their voices desperate, ragged. The deck tilted violently. I staggered to my feet only to see flames racing across the superstructure. Then she began to roll. The Hood was dying, and she was taking over 1,400 men with her. I scrambled toward the rail, choking on smoke, ears ringing, eyes burning. Behind me, my shipmates, my friends, my brothers, were trapped in fire and steel. Some prayed, others screamed for their mothers. Some simply stared, frozen in disbelief that the mighty Hood could fall. I jumped. The freezing water struck me like a hammer, knocking the breath from my lungs. The cold stabbed into me, deeper than any knife. I kicked, clawed my way to the surface, gasping, coughing, surrounded by wreckage and bodies. I turned in time to see the Hood's stern lift high, impossibly high, then vanish beneath the waves. In less than 3 minutes, she was gone. The silence after was unbearable. Only the hiss of steam, the lapping of waves against debris, and the faint cries of the dying broke the stillness. I clung to wreckage, shivering violently, teeth chattering. Around me floated the faces of men I had laughed with only hours before, now pale, still, their eyes staring at nothing. When the rescue came, I was barely conscious. I learned later that only 3 of us survived, 3 out of more than 1,400. The Hood was gone, her crew entombed in the cold Atlantic. The pride of the Royal Navy had been reduced to twisted steel on the ocean floor. Even now, decades later, I wake in the night to the sound of that explosion, the cries of my shipmates. They say I was lucky to survive, but it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like a curse. To carry the memory of 1,400 men lost in less than 3 minutes. To be one of 3 who lived to tell the tale. 12. Bismarck, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Otto Mau's signal officer. When I first set foot on the Bismarck, I felt like I was walking on the back of a god. She was massive, 50,000 tons of steel and firepower, the pride of the Kriegsmarine. We believed she was invincible. After all, hadn't she just destroyed the Hood with a single blow? That victory filled us with a dangerous pride. We walked taller, spoke louder, and laughed as if death could never touch us. But the sea always has the last word. After the battle with Hood, the Royal Navy hunted us like wolves. They wanted blood, revenge. I remember standing on the signal deck, scanning the horizon, feeling the tension in every heartbeat of the men around me. We knew they were coming, but we didn't know when. Then they found us. It began with the swordfish biplanes, for God's sake, slow, fragile things that looked like toys. We laughed at them at first. How could cloth and wire planes threaten the Bismarck? But laughter died quickly when one torpedo struck our rudder. It jammed hard, locking us in a slow, helpless circle. In that instant, we were doomed. The hunters had us by the throat. The final battle came at dawn on May 27th. The horizon filled with British battleships. Rodney, King George V, Dorsetshire. Their guns already flashing. The first salvo slammed into us, tearing apart our superstructure, sending men flying in sprays of blood and steel. I was thrown to the deck, ears ringing, teeth rattling. The deck quaked under each hit. Men screamed all around me, voices breaking under terror. Fires raged below, compartments flooded. Still, we fired back. The Bismarck's guns roared defiantly, but it was like spitting at a storm. Shell after shell rained down on us. The great ship shuddered, staggered, bled. I scrambled to my post, smoke stinging my eyes, my lungs burning. Every order shouted by the captain was drowned by the thunder of shells. I remember looking up and seeing our proud turrets silenced one by one, great cannons twisted and useless. Our hull was shredded, our deck a slaughterhouse. Captain Lindemann stood tall to the last. His voice cut through the chaos. Abandoned ship. The words chilled me more than any shell. The Bismarck, our mighty fortress, was finished. I stumbled toward the rail, flames snapping at my heels. Men were leaping overboard, some on fire, others clutching rosaries, some simply running, blind with panic. I hesitated, looking back once at the ship that had been my world. She was aflame, broken, but still proud. Then I jumped. The Atlantic swallowed me in an icy embrace. The shock stole my breath, pain stabbing every nerve. I kicked, thrashed, clawed my way to the surface, gasping for air, coughing seawater. All around me, the ocean was littered with wreckage, oil, and bodies. The cries of dying men carried across the waves, voices of comrades I would never see again, and then silence. I watched the Bismarck roll slowly, her massive hull shuddering, and finally sink beneath the gray waves. She went down fighting, but down she went. Out of over 2,200 aboard, only about 110 of us were pulled from the water. The rest lie in the cold dark, entombed with the pride of Germany. I was dragged half dead onto a British destroyer, shivering, soaked in oil, barely alive. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt hollow. The Bismarck was gone, and with her, nearly all my brothers. She had seemed eternal, indestructible. But in the end, she was just steel. And steel rusts, steel burns, steel sinks. Even now, I sometimes dream of her. I see her guns firing, feel the deck trembling under my boots, hear the thunder of the last battle. And then I see her vanish beneath the sea, leaving only silence. Pride had made us blind, and the sea made sure we paid the price. 13. USS Arizona, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Diary of Survivor, Seaman First Class, Donald Stratton. December 7th began like any other Sunday in Pearl Harbor. The sky was blue, the water calm, and the Arizona sat proudly at her berth. I was standing on the signal bridge when I first heard it. The low hum of engines, at first so faint it could have been mistaken for distant thunder. Then it grew louder. I shaded my eyes, and there they were. Planes, dozens of them. The red circle of the rising sun painted on their wings. The first explosions ripped the morning apart. Bombs screamed down, torpedoes tore into battleships. The harbor turned into chaos. The Nevada, the West Virginia, the Oklahoma, they were all hit. Men ran for cover, guns roared, smoke rose in black columns that blotted out the sky. Then it happened. At 8:06 a.m., a bomb found us. It plunged through our forward magazines, and in an instant, the Arizona became a volcano. The explosion tore her apart, a roar so loud it seemed to crack the sky. Flames erupted in every direction, a fireball that seared my skin and threw me to the deck. The world was nothing but smoke, fire, and screams. I staggered to my feet, skin burning, clothes in tatters. Around me men writhed, their flesh blackened, their voices hoarse with agony. The deck was tilting, the ship breaking beneath us. I knew we had only moments. A rope was thrown from the repair ship Vestal moored beside us. Hands blistered, raw, and bleeding, I hauled myself across. Every pull in agony, the smell of burning flesh, the roar of fire, the cries of dying men. It was a nightmare that would never end. I survived, but 1,177 of my shipmates did not. They are still there, entombed within the Arizona. Their resting place marked by oil that still leaks from the wreck, a black tear upon the sea. I carry the scars on my body to this day, but the greater scars are the ones no one can see. The memories of brothers burned alive. Of a ship torn apart in seconds, December 7th was not just the day we were attacked. It was the day my innocence died. 14. HMS Barham, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor, able seaman James Rowe the Barham, had seen much of the war already. Proud, battered, but still fighting. On November 25, 1941, we were sailing with the fleet in the Mediterranean when the alarm was raised. U-boat sighted. My heart hammered as I manned my station. We all knew the danger, but none of us were ready for what came. 3 torpedoes struck us on the port side in rapid succession. The force threw me to the deck. The ship shuddered violently, the sound of tearing metal echoing through every bulkhead. Men screamed as compartments flooded instantly. I scrambled to my feet, choking on smoke, trying to find a way to the open deck. She began to list heavily, rolling over as water poured in. Some men were crushed, trapped by machinery. Others tried to climb up the tilting deck, their faces pale with terror. I clung to a railing, praying. Then it happened. The Barham rolled almost completely onto her side and exploded. The blast was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. The magazines went up in a blinding fireball, tearing the ship in half. Flames and steel engulfed us. The heat seared my skin. The shockwave threw me into the sea. When I surfaced, the Barham was gone, replaced by a boiling cloud of smoke, fire, and wreckage. I swam, coughing, my ears ringing. All around me, men cried for help, some burning, others broken. I clung to debris, half mad with fear, as the sea turned red with oil and blood. Of more than 1,200 aboard, only about 450 of us survived. I still see her in my dreams, that last roll, the terrible explosion, the screams of my shipmates. Proud ship, gone in less than 5 minutes. 15. USS Yorktown, 1942, Battle of Midway. Diary of Survivor, Lieutenant Commander John Thatch. The Battle of Midway was the turning point. But victory came at a terrible price. The Yorktown, my home, had already been battered at Coral Sea. She bore her wounds proudly, patched and scarred, but ready to fight again. On June 4th, 1942, she faced her greatest test. The Japanese struck us hard. Bombs rained down, explosions tearing holes in our flight deck. I remember the jolt as one tore through near the bridge, the shock knocking me off my feet. Smoke filled the air, men shouting, fire spreading. Yet we fought on. Damaged crews worked with desperate fury. Pilots scrambled, guns roared. By sheer will, we kept her afloat. But the enemy came again. Torpedoes slammed into her hull, lifting the great carrier from the sea before crashing back down. The deck tilted, water flooding in. The Yorktown groaned like a dying beast, steel twisting under the strain. Abandoned ship. The words cut through the chaos like a blade. I didn't want to believe them. I ran through smoke-filled corridors, past wounded men dragging themselves along. The deck was alive with fire and oil. I leaped into the Pacific, the water cold, the taste of salt and fuel thick on my tongue. I swam until my arms gave out, then clung to a floating plank, coughing, gasping, praying. Around me, men bobbed in the waves, their voices carrying across the sea. Some prayed, some cursed, some cried out for mothers who could not answer. The Yorktown sank slowly, stubbornly, as though unwilling to admit defeat. She finally slipped beneath the waves days later, after another torpedo strike. Watching her go was like losing a part of myself. She was more than steel. She was home. And when she went under, she took part of us with her. 16. HMS Glorious, 1940, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Lieutenant Ian Barkworth. We had been retreating from Norway, exhausted, bitter, but alive. The Glorious R carrier was meant to bring us home. The sea was calm, deceptively so, as we steamed south on June 8, 1940. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. 2 German ships appeared on the horizon, the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau giants. We were outgunned, outmatched, and unready. Our lookouts had been lax, our air patrols absent. The enemy opened fire, shells screamed across the water, massive plumes erupting around us. The first hits smashed into our flight deck, tearing aircraft apart, sending fuel and men flying. The noise was deafening, the ship shuddering with every blow. We tried to fight back, but it was hopeless. Our guns were too few, too small. The Glorious was ripped apart piece by piece. Fires spread uncontrollably, smoke choking the sky. Men screamed, some burned alive, others hurled into the sea by explosions. I remember clinging to wreckage, the water icy, the cries of the dying all around me. Hours passed, then days. Sharks came, circling, taking men one by one. Thirst cracked our lips. Madness crept in. Of more than 1,500 aboard, only a couple hundred survived. The rest, my shipmates, my brothers, vanished into the cold northern sea. I still see their faces every night in every dream. 17. HMT Rona, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Corporal Frank Malone. We were packed tight aboard the Rona. Soldiers bound for the front. Over 2,000 of us, cramped, hot, restless. The sea around Algeria was calm that day, November 26, 1943. Calm. Until it wasn't. The enemy came from the sky. Luftwaffe bombers swooped down, their engines a menacing growl. Anti-aircraft guns roared in response, the deck alive with chaos. Then one of them fired something strange. Not a bomb, not a torpedo, but something new. A guided missile. It struck us midship with terrifying precision. The explosion was monstrous, fire and steel ripping through the crowded decks. Men were shredded instantly, thrown into the air like rag dolls. Flames roared, smoke poured, panic spread like wildfire. I remember the heat, unbearable, searing. Men clawed for lifeboats, but they were destroyed or jammed. Others leapt into the sea, their uniforms ablaze. I joined them, hitting the cold water with a force that knocked the breath from me. Around me, chaos. Hundreds drowned, burned, or were dragged under. Oil slicked the surface, flames dancing on the water. I swam until my arms felt like lead, clinging to wreckage, praying for rescue. Of over 2,000 aboard, more than 1,100 died. The Rona slipped beneath the waves, another secret tragedy, barely spoken of, as though the sea itself had swallowed not just the men, but their memory. 18. SS Dorchester, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Private Richard Pope. The Dorchester was no luxury liner. She was a converted troop ship, packed to the brim with over 900 of us. Headed across the icy North Atlantic in February 1943, the air was thick with sweat, fear, and the smell of too many bodies crammed together. Every creak of the hull reminded us that U-boats prowled these waters. We tried to laugh, to play cards, to talk about home, but the shadow of death hung over us like the cold mist outside. On the night of February 3rd, I was below deck when the torpedo struck. The impact was violent, a deafening roar that sent me tumbling. Lights flickered, then died, plunging us into choking darkness. Panic erupted instantly. Men scrambled over one another, shouting, crying, cursing, desperate to find a way out. The Dorchester was already listing badly. I'd forced my way to the deck, the icy wind biting through my soaked clothes. Chaos. Lifeboats swung wildly, overcrowded, some capsizing as men fought to climb aboard. The sea glowed faintly from flares, revealing oil-slicked waves, broken planks, boadies. And in the midst of it all, for chaplains. I can still see them, standing calmly amid the madness. Reverend George Fox, Rabbi Alexander Good, Father John Washington, and Reverend Clark Pauling. They moved among the terrified soldiers, offering life jackets, words of comfort, prayers. When the supply of life jackets ran out, they took off their own and gave them to others. I will never forget that moment. For men of God, different faiths, united in sacrifice. I leaped into the freezing Atlantic, the shock stealing my breath. Salt water and oil filled my mouth, the cold slicing into my bones. I flailed, kicking, reaching for anything that would keep me afloat. My hands found a piece of wreckage, and I clung with everything I had, teeth chattering uncontrollably. As the Dorchester slipped beneath the waves, I looked back one last time. The 4 chaplains were still there, linked arm in arm, their voices rising in hymns and prayers as the sea swallowed them whole. Out of 902 men, only about 230 of us survived. The rest lie in that icy grave, along with the chaplains who gave everything. To this day, when I close my eyes, I hear their voices in the dark. Steady, strong, unafraid. 19, USS Gambier Bay, 1944, World War II, Diary of Survivor. Seaman Harold Keller, we called her the Baby Flat Top, one of the small escort carriers. Fragile, undergunned, but proud. On October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Samar, we faced the unthinkable, the might of the Japanese fleet bearing down on us like wolves on sheep. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, giants compared to our little carrier. At dawn, the horizon erupted in fire. Their shells screamed across the water, exploding all around us. The Gambier Bay shook with every near miss, spray cascading over the deck. Planes scrambled desperately from our flight deck, pilots flying into hell with little hope of return. Our gunners fired until their barrels glowed red, but our shells were pebbles against mountains. A salvo found its mark. The ship convulsed, the deck splitting, flames rising. I was thrown off my feet, ears ringing, eyes stinging from smoke. The Gambier Bay was bleeding out, her engines dying, her speed slowing. She turned broadside, helpless. Abandoned ship, the words cut like a knife. I stumbled to the rail, the deck already tilting, men leaping into the waves below. I hesitated, looked back. The Gambier Bay was my home, my protector, and now she was dying. Then I jumped. The Pacific engulfed me, salt and oil burning my throat. I surfaced to chaos, wreckage, men screaming, Japanese shells still raining down around us, as geysers erupting like monstrous hands reaching from the sea. I kicked desperately, clinging to a plank, praying the next shell wouldn't find me. The Gambier Bay rolled, her stern rising like a wounded beast, then slipped beneath the waves, leaving only smoke and screams behind. Out of more than 800 aboard, hundreds perished. We were left floating, alone, surrounded by death, praying for rescue. I survived, but the image of her sinking, the little carrier that stood against giants, will haunt me until the day I die. 20. USS Princeton, 1944, World War II, Diary of Survivor. Ensign William Hayes, the Princeton, was a light carrier, fast, nimble, but lightly armored. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, we were on station off Luzon. The sky was clear, deceptively peaceful. Then came the Japanese dive bombers. The sirens screamed. I raced to my station, heart pounding, every nerve alive with terror. Bombs whistled down, their shrieks cutting through the roar of anti-aircraft fire. One struck us squarely near the aft elevator. The explosion was catastrophic. Flames erupted instantly, tearing through decks, igniting fuel. The air filled with choking smoke and the cries of the wounded. Damaged crews fought desperately, dragging hoses, carrying stretchers, but the fire spread like a living thing. Ammunition began to cook off, deafening blasts that shook the ship, tearing holes in bulkheads. I remember the heat, unbearable, suffocating, like standing in a furnace. My skin blistered as I stumbled through corridors filled with smoke, searching for a way out. Abandoned ship. The call came at last. I staggered topside, the deck a twisted inferno. Men leapt into the sea, their uniforms ablaze. I followed, the Pacific swallowing me whole. The shock of the water was almost a relief compared to the inferno behind me. From the waves, I watched the Princeton burn. Her decks buckled, explosions ripping her apart. Hours later, her magazines went up in a massive blast that sent a column of smoke and fire miles into the sky. She was gone, just like that. Out of her crew, hundreds perished, trapped in the flames. I was one of the lucky ones pulled from the sea. But lucky is a cruel word. See their faces still. Men I joked with at breakfast, gone by noon, consumed by fire and steel. The Princeton may have been a light carrier, but she carried heavy souls, brave souls, and I carry them with me still. 21, HMS Barham, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Able Seaman Thomas Wren. The Barham was my world. She wasn't just a battleship. She was a floating city of iron, the kind of ship you thought could take on the whole German Navy by herself. For nearly a year, she had been my home, and the men aboard my family. On November 25, 1941, we were patrolling off the Egyptian coast, the sun glaring down on the calm waters of the Mediterranean. It seemed like an ordinary day at sea, but the sea never stays ordinary for long. I was on deck when the warning came. A voice shouted, urgent, panicked. Torpedoes starboard side. I barely had time to glance over the rail when I saw the white wake slicing through the water toward us. My stomach dropped. We all knew what was coming, but knowing doesn't make it easier. The impact was thunderous. 3 torpedoes slammed into us in quick succession, each one rocking the ship like a giant's fist. I was thrown to the deck, my helmet skittering away. The Barham shuddered violently under me, her steel groaning, rivets snapping. Smoke belched from below decks, thick and choking. The air filled with the sound of tearing metal and men screaming. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, trying to make sense of the chaos. The deck tilted sharply, sending men and equipment sliding. Water surged into the lower compartments. I could hear bulkheads collapsing under the force of the flooding. We were listing badly and fast. Panic spread like fire. Men rushed topside, faces gray with terror. Many burned, bloodied, or staggering from the shock. I joined the flood of sailors, forcing my way through the smoke, my ears ringing with the pounding of the engines struggling beneath us. The Barham was dying, but I wasn't ready to die with her. When I reached the open air, I froze. The great ship was rolling, slowly at first, then faster. Her massive belly rising out of the water like some wounded leviathan. For a moment, there was silence, a dreadful pause before the inevitable. Then it happened. The magazines blew. The explosion was like the end of the world. A fireball erupted, towering into the sky, so bright it burned my eyes. The shockwave hurled me into the air like a rag doll. I hit the water hard, the breath driven from my lungs. My body screamed in pain as salt water filled my mouth and nose. I clawed my way to the surface, coughing, gasping, my ears bleeding from the pressure of the blast. Round me, the sea was a nightmare. Wreckage rained down in a deadly shower. Steel plates, twisted beams, flaming debris. Boaties floated in the oil-slicked water, some still, some thrashing in panic. The air was filled with the cries of men, cries for help, cries for mothers, cries cut short by the sea. I latched onto a piece of wreckage, my fingers numb, my mind reeling. I looked back, the Barham was gone. She had disappeared beneath the waves in less than 5 minutes, taking over 800 men with her. Just minutes before, she had stood proud against the horizon. Now there was only smoke and death. Rescue came hours later, but by then the sea had already claimed most of my brothers. I was dragged aboard another ship, shivering, coated in oil, my body trembling with shock. They told me I was one of the lucky ones. But luck feels cruel when you know that so many others will never see land again. Even now, I hear the explosion in my dreams. I see the fireball, feel the water close over me, hear the screams fading into silence. The Barham is still out there, her crew entombed within her steel hull, resting in the deep. And I, one of the few who escaped, carried the weight of their memory every single day. 22, USS Juno, 1942, World War II, Diary of Survivor. Seaman Charles Archer, the Juno, wasn't the biggest ship in the fleet, but she had a spirit about her, sleek, fast, bristling with guns. She was a fighting ship through and through. But what made her famous, what made her more than steel and armor, were the 5 Sullivan brothers. Everyone aboard knew them. George, Francis, Joseph, Madison, and Albert. Always together, always smiling, they brought light into even the darkest days at sea. On November 13, 1942, that light was extinguished. We were off Guadalcanal, locked in the fury of the naval battle. The Japanese Navy came at us hard, and the Juno fought back with everything she had. But she was already wounded, torpedoes and shells tearing into her hull. We limped through the chaos, every man aboard praying we'd make it out alive. That morning, the Juno sailed with the remnants of our task force, battered but afloat. I dared to believe we might survive. Then it happened. Japanese submarine found us. One torpedo struck home. The explosion ripped through the ship with apocalyptic force. I was thrown into the sea before I even knew what had happened. When I surfaced, the Juno was gone. Just like that, minus 6,000 tons of steel and nearly 700 men vanished beneath the waves in less than a minute. Only about 100 of us floated in the aftermath. We clung to wreckage, oil burning our throats, eyes stinging from salt and smoke. Some were wounded, bleeding into the sea. Sharks came almost immediately, circling, darting, tearing men away, screaming into the dark water. Every hour, there were fewer voices. We waited for rescue, certain it would come. But it didn't. Command believed no one could have survived the blast, and so we were left to drift. Days passed, sun by day, cold by night. Men died of thirst, of wounds, of despair, watched friends slip beneath the waves, too weak to hold on any longer. By the 8th day, only 10 of us remained, the rest, swallowed by the sea. And among the lost were the Sullivans. 5 brothers, inseparable in life, inseparable in death. I can still hear their laughter in my memory, but in my dreams, I see their faces in the water, pale and lifeless, drifting away from me. When rescue finally came, I was barely alive, more a ghost than a man. They called me a survivor. But surviving is not living. I left most of myself in those waters, along with the Juno and the brothers who made her more than just a ship. 23. HMS Prince of Wales, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Petty Officer Arthur Hayes, the Prince of Wales, was sleek, formidable, and fresh from the docks. A symbol of modern naval power. In December 1941, we steamed through the South China Sea, escorting convoys, hoping to deter the Japanese advance. I had served aboard her only a few weeks, but already I felt a bond with the ship and the men. She was alive in ways that steel often isn't. On December 10th, Japanese planes appeared on the horizon, hundreds of them, dive bombers, torpedo planes, a storm of wings and engines. We scrambled to stations, anti-aircraft guns spitting fire, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with your hands. Then the bombs hit. 1, 2, 3. Explosions tore through the decks, throwing men across the bridge and into the corridors. Smoke billowed, flames shot skyward, and water began to flood the lower compartments. The Prince of Wales shuddered as if in pain, groaning under each strike. I ran through smoke-filled passageways, clutching at pipes, trying to find the upper deck. Men were screaming, some burned, some crushed by collapsing steel. I heard the engines dying, heard the awful sound of bulkheads twisting. Then came the order no one wanted to hear. Abandon ship. I clambered over debris onto the deck. The sea roared around us, waves crashing over the tilted hull. I jumped, hitting the water with a bone-jarring shock. Flames danced on the waves. Oil slicks coating the water, boaties flailing. The Prince of Wales rolled slowly, then sank, disappearing beneath the waves, along with hundreds of men. Hours later, I was rescued, but the images remain. The twisting steel, the cries, the fire on the water. The Prince of Wales was new, proud, and she went down in less than an hour, taking so many brave souls with her. 24 HMS Repulse, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Able seaman George Whitman, the Repulse had a reputation. Fast, heavily armed, a terror to our enemies. On the same day as the Prince of Wales, December 10, 1941, she faced the full force of Japanese aircraft near Malaya. I stood on deck, the salt wind in my hair, watching the sky darken with the wings of dive bombers. I had been at sea for years, but nothing prepared me for this. Bombs rained down like hail. Explosions shook the hull violently, fire and smoke engulfing everything. Men were thrown across the deck, their screams blending with the roar of engines and bursting shells. We tried to fight back, our anti-aircraft guns blazing, but for every plane we downed, another came to take its place. The ship shuddered as a torpedo hit amidships. The impact lifted us off the deck, and water poured into the lower compartments instantly. Fires spread uncontrollably, cutting off escape routes. Men screamed as they tried to reach the boats. Some burned, some crushed, some thrown into the sea by secondary explosions. I reached a lifeboat, lowered it with trembling hands, and jumped into the turbulent sea. The water was cold, oily, filled with floating debris. Flames flickered on the waves, bodies drifted past, silent cries reaching into the night. The Repulse rolled slowly, then disappeared beneath the waves, leaving only fire and smoke behind. Only a fraction of the crew survived. I was one of the lucky ones, but luck feels hollow when so many men, brothers in arms, vanish in an instant. Every time I close my eyes, I see the flames, hear the screams, feel the ship rolling beneath me. 25 USS Lexington, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Aviation machinist mate Robert Hayes, the Lexington, was a symbol of American naval power, a mighty carrier bristling with planes and men. In May 1942, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, we faced the Japanese fleet. I had been aboard for months, my hands and lungs filled with the smell of aviation fuel and steel. I thought I knew danger. I was wrong. The first bombs fell around mid-morning. Explosions rocked the deck, throwing men into catwalks and machinery. Smoke filled the air, choking us, burning our eyes. Fire spread quickly, feeding on gasoline and paper. Men screamed as the ship shuddered with each hit. Then came the torpedoes. They struck hard amidships, opening gaping holes below the waterline. I was thrown to the deck as the Lexington groaned, listing. Water poured in, flooding compartments in minutes. Some of the crew tried to fight the fire, but the combination of flames and flooding was unstoppable. The order to abandon ship came. I ran through smoke and heat over injured men, across twisted steel. I jumped into the sea just as the Lexington heeled violently, her flight deck tilting into the water. Flames licked the waves, oil burning, the cries of men echoing in the smoke-choked air. Hours later, floating on wreckage and debris. I watched the Lexington explode violently, her magazines cooking off one by one. She sank beneath the waves, taking nearly 200 of her crew with her. I was pulled from the water, half dead, shaking, numb. The smell of burning oil and the memory of the screaming men remain with me. The Lexington was gone, but the ghosts of those lost aboard her sail with me still. I survived, but the sea took a part of my soul that day, and it will never be returned. 26 USS Helena, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Ensign Paul Carver. The Helena was fast, armored, and proud. A light cruiser built for speed and resilience. On July 6, 1943, during the Battle of Kula Gulf, we were moving under the cover of darkness, hoping to strike the Japanese destroyers that had harassed our convoys. I had served aboard for months, but nothing prepared me for what that night would become. The Japanese ambushed us. Torpedoes streaked through the water silently, invisible until the explosions ripped through our hull. The first hit threw me across the deck, the roar of the blast deafening, flames licking around me. Smoke filled the night, thick and choking, blinding us to everything except chaos. The Helena listed, groaning like a wounded animal. Men scrambled to save themselves, some slipping overboard, some trapped beneath twisted steel. Fire spread rapidly, consuming compartments, melting cables, igniting fuel. I ran across the tilted deck, knees scraped, hands burned, shouting for men to abandon ship. The second torpedo struck, tearing a massive hole below the waterline. Water surged in instantly. The Helena shuddered violently, rolling sharply. I was thrown into the frigid water, hitting hard, gasping, coughing. Around me, the night was alive with fire and screaming, the salt water turning red with oil and blood. Ours felt like days, as I clung to wreckage, pulling myself along as sharks circled, men screaming, some disappearing beneath the surface before anyone could help. Eventually, rescue came. I was one of the few pulled from that burning, sinking nightmare. Helena had been lost, her guns silent, her crew scattered in the sea. Even today I dream of her. The fire, the explosions, the water swallowing her proud steel hull. I survived, but I carry the faces of those lost with me, forever floating in memory alongside her wreckage. 27. HMS Glorious, 1940, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Sub-Lieutenant Edward Harrow the Glorious had been part of the Norway campaign, escorting our troops and aircraft. On June 8, 1940, after retreating from Narvik, we steamed south, exhausted but relieved. We thought the journey would be routine. The sea had other plans. 2 German battlecruisers appeared on the horizon, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Giants. I watched them through binoculars, the sun glinting off their steel, knowing immediately we were in mortal danger. Our carrier was fast, but heavily outgunned. Panic spread among the crew, tension twisting our stomachs like knives. The first shells hit. Explosions tore through the deck, setting planes, fuel, and men ablaze. The Glorious shuddered, rolling with every strike. Fires spread uncontrollably, and thick smoke filled the air, choking our lungs, stinging our eyes. I ran through the corridors, finding men crushed or burned, some paralyzed by fear. The second wave of shells hit amidships. The carrier listed sharply, throwing me to the deck. I could hear the engines fail, feel the tilt increasing with each passing moment. Men leaped overboard, some with nothing to cling to, some on fire. I followed them into the freezing waters, the shock of the sea stealing my breath, salt stinging my eyes, oil coating my hair and face. The Glorious rolled over and sank in minutes, swallowing more than 1,500 souls. Rescue was slow. We floated, shivering, terrified, witnessing the relentless advance of sharks and the slow, inevitable fading of our comrades. Only a fraction survived. I was one of them, but the weight of those lost will never leave me. 28. HMT Rona, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Corporal James Eldridge, the Rona, carried soldiers and equipment across the Mediterranean. Over 2,000 of us were crowded on her decks in late November 1943, the air thick with anticipation and fear. We joked to distract ourselves from the tension, but deep down, we all knew the dangers lurking in the waves and sky. It was November 26 when the Luftwaffe appeared. German bombers circled like predators, engines growling, bombs and guided missiles at the ready. I had never seen weapons like this precise, unstoppable. One missile struck our midsection. The impact was monstrous. The deck heaved, steel screamed, men were thrown into the air. Flames engulfed compartments instantly. I was hurled overboard, surfacing with burns on my arms and soot in my hair. Around me, men screamed, the water alive with wreckage, fire, and floating bodies. Oil coated the surface, flames dancing upon it. I clung to debris, swimming for hours, praying for rescue, hearing men beside me vanish beneath the waves. Over 1,100 lives were lost that day. I survived barely, but the memory of the screams, the burning men, the relentless fire on the sea, it is a scar that will never fade. The Rona rests below the waves, a silent tomb for so many who never made it home. 29. SS Dorchester, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Private Leonard Harris, the Dorchester, was packed with over 900 men. Soldiers heading across the North Atlantic in February 1943, the cold was biting, the sea rough, and tension hung heavy. We were aware of U-boats, but no one imagined the horror that night would bring. On February 3rd, a torpedo struck. The explosion was instantaneous, throwing men into the air, shattering decks, igniting fires. Darkness enveloped us. Smoke choked our lungs. Screams filled the corridors. I pushed through chaos to reach the deck, seeing men burned, crushed, clinging to debris. 4 chaplains moved through the panic, handing out life jackets until theirs were gone, then giving theirs to others. Their calm courage was a lighthouse in the storm. I clung to a piece of wreckage, watching as the Dorchester slowly sank beneath us, the sea swallowing men, flames and screams alike. Only about 230 of us survived. The rest, including the chaplains, vanished into the icy waters. I float through life carrying the memory of their sacrifice, their bravery, and the haunting cries of men lost too soon. 30. USS Princeton, 1944, World War II. Diary of Survivor Ensign David Colton. The Princeton was a light carrier, but fast, proud, and full of life. On October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, we were off Luzon. The morning had been calm, deceptively so. Then Japanese dive bombers appeared, screaming through the sky. The first bombs hit amidships. Explosions tore the deck apart, sending planes and men flying. Fires erupted, fuel ignited, and smoke filled the air. I ran through burning corridors, helping the wounded, screaming for others to move, my own skin blistering from the heat. A torpedo struck shortly after, punching through the hull. Water flooded in, flames licked over the deck, and men jumped into the sea. I followed, gasping, coughing, clinging to debris as explosions shook the water around me. The Princeton exploded violently hours later, her magazines cooking off in a final hellish fireball. Hundreds of men were lost. I survived, but the cries, the flames, and the burning oil on the water are etched in my memory forever. The Princeton rests in the deep, her ghosts and mine entwined forever. 31. RMS Lusitania, 1915. WWII, Diary of Survivor. Second-class passenger Edward Thompson. I had boarded the Lusitania thinking it was the pinnacle of modern travel. Luxury cabins, fine dining, the hum of engines promising a smooth voyage. May 7th, 1915. Should have been ordinary. The sea glittered under a spring sun. Children played on deck, and I felt a rare sense of peace. Then came the explosion. It wasn't a slow disaster, it was instantaneous. The torpedo from a German U-boat struck amidships. The ship shuddered violently, the deck cracking beneath my feet. Panic erupted. I saw women and children thrown into the air, The screams of men and crew blending with the groaning steel. Smoke and steam clouded my vision. I scrambled for a lifeboat, my hands raw from ropes. Others weren't so lucky. Lifeboats were damaged, many overturned by the heaving deck. I jumped into the icy Atlantic, salt water shocking my lungs, oil and debris floating around me like deadly flotsam. The Lusitania sank in less than 20 minutes. Hundreds were lost in the frigid sea before rescue could reach us. I clung to wreckage, shivering uncontrollably, listening to the cries that never ended. I survived, but the memory of the great ship disintegrating beneath the waves is burned into me forever. 32. SS Andrea Doria, 1956. Diary of Survivor. Third-class passenger Maria Rossi. I had never been so excited to travel across the Atlantic. The Andrea Doria was a beautiful ship, gleaming, modern, a floating palace. On July 25, 1956, fog covered the sea near Nantucket, thick as cotton. I could barely see the water ahead, then a collision. The Stockholm emerged from the mist. Before anyone could react, steel crushed steel. The impact threw me to the floor of my cabin. Screams echoed through the corridors. The ship tilted dangerously. Water began to pour into the lower decks, sweeping away everything in its path. I clambered onto the deck, terrified. Lifeboats were difficult to launch due to the tilt and panic. I watched passengers struggle, children crying, couples clinging desperately to each other. The Andrea Doria's lights flickered, smoke trailing from her engines. The ship lay partially submerged. Rescue boats worked tirelessly. I survived. Pulled aboard another vessel, soaked and terrified, while hundreds of passengers never made it. Even now, I can see the tilted ship, the water filling her hulls, and the chaos that unfolded in mere moments. 33. USS Indianapolis, 1945, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Seaman First Class Frank Martin. The Indianapolis was proud and fast, carrying crucial cargo to the Pacific Theater. I was young, just 19, but proud to serve aboard her. On July 30th, 1945, we were returning from Tinian after delivering parts for the atomic bomb. The sun was setting. Everything seemed normal, the calm before the storm. Then, a torpedo from a Japanese submarine. The ship shuddered, the hull ripped open. Men were thrown into the water, some injured, others instantly dead. Fire and smoke erupted, though not as widespread as in other sinkings. The water around us was alive with screams and floating bodies. I clung to a piece of debris, watching men disappear beneath the waves, the sea churning with fear and salt. Rescue didn't come for 4 days. Sharks hunted relentlessly. Hundreds were devoured. Dehydration and exposure claimed others. I floated in horror, praying, watching my shipmates vanish one by one. Only 317 of the nearly 1,200 aboard survived. The Indianapolis sank, and with her so many young lives. The guilt and trauma of surviving among such death remain with me forever. 34. HMS Royal Oak, 1939, World War II. Diary of Survivor. A Bell Seaman Robert Phillips. We were anchored at Scapa Flow, confident in the security of the base. The Royal Oak was our fortress, proud and massive. On the night of October 14, 1939, a German U-boat penetrated our defenses. I was below deck when the first torpedo struck. The hull shook violently. Water rushed in instantly. Screaming filled the corridors. I could hear men trapped, crying, panicked. I scrambled to the surface, smoke and steam stinging my eyes. The Royal Oak began to list. I clung to a ladder, watching the chaos unfold around me. Lifeboats were limited, and many men jumped into the cold, dark water. Torpedo hit again, and then the ship began to sink quickly. I hit the freezing sea and swam, pulling myself over floating debris, watching men disappear beneath the waves. Over 800 sailors died that night. I survived, but the image of the Royal Oak breaking apart, flames reflected on the water, stays with me to this day. 35. RMS Titanic, 1912. Diary of Survivor. First-class passenger Margaret Collins. I had boarded the Titanic with dreams of a new life, glittering in my cabin, the grand staircase and opulent halls filling me with awe. On April 14, 1912, the air was crisp, calm. to calm. Then the iceberg struck. A grinding roar shook the ship. The lights flickered. Men shouted. Water gushed into the lower decks. I remember the initial disbelief, the casual optimism that it couldn't be so bad, until we realized the ship was listing dangerously. I helped load women and children into lifeboats, praying we would survive. The water was freezing. Many jumped before the boats could be lowered. The Titanic began to break apart, her massive stern rising into the night sky before she vanished beneath the waves. I survived in a lifeboat, shivering, watching hundreds of people disappear into the dark Atlantic. That night took over 1,500 lives, and the sound of the ship splitting, the screams, and the cold silence after will haunt me forever. 36 HMS Barham, 1941, World War II, Diary of Survivor. Midshipman Charles Bennett. The Barham was a battleship we all trusted. Heavy armor, big guns. She felt indestructible. On November 25, 1941, in the Mediterranean, the sea was calm, the sun bright. Suddenly, a German U-boat struck. The first torpedo tore into our side with an ear-splitting roar. I was thrown across the deck, my ears ringing, smoke and steam rushing past me. The Barham shuddered, groaning like a dying beast. Men screamed as compartments flooded instantly, water sweeping them away before they could react. I scrambled topside, choking on smoke. Then 3 more torpedoes slammed into her. The deck tilted violently, flames erupted, and steel twisted with monstrous shrieks. The order to abandon ship came too late for many. I leaped into the sea just as the Barham's magazines detonated. The explosion was cataclysmic, a fireball of orange and black rising into the sky, the force throwing men and debris high above the water. I was knocked unconscious briefly, waking to find myself clinging to wreckage, my ears deafened, the surface slick with oil. Over 800 men died. I survived, but every night since, I hear that explosion. The sound of a mighty ship destroyed in seconds. 37 USS Yorktown, 1942, Battle of Midway. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Second Class Walter Hughes. The Yorktown was our pride, an aircraft carrier that had already faced the Japanese at Coral Sea. On June 4, 1942, at Midway, we were under constant assault. I worked below deck when the first bomb struck. The whole ship shook, flames bursting through the passageways, men thrown like rag dolls. We fought fires, dragging wounded men out, but the heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. Then torpedoes hit. Water surged in flooding compartments. Yorktown listed sharply, alarms blaring, crew scrambling to escape. I made it topside in time to see men leaping into the sea, some engulfed in flames, others crushed by debris. I followed them, the cold shock of the Pacific stealing my breath. Around me, the Yorktown smoldered, her proud deck broken, planes twisted like toys. She stayed afloat for a while, but 2 days later, Japanese submarines finished her. Watching her slip beneath the waves felt like losing a brother. Hundreds died. I survived, but the smell of burning fuel and the sight of our great carrier sinking are with me always. 38 USS Juneau, 1942, World War II, Diary of Survivor, Fireman First Class Henry Adams. The Juneau was fast and sleek, a light cruiser, and we thought ourselves lucky to be aboard her. After the Battle of Guadalcanal on November 13, 1942, we were limping home when a Japanese submarine found us. The torpedo hit was devastating. The Juneau didn't groan or fight, she exploded. A flash of fire, a thunderous roar, and the ship was gone. I was hurled into the sea, my body bruised, lungs burning. When I surfaced, there was no ship, just fire, wreckage, and men screaming in disbelief. We floated for days. Water was thick with oil, the sun merciless. Sharks circled, striking suddenly. I watched men dragged under, their screams ending in gurgles. Thirst drove some mad, they drank seawater and died raving. Rescue came too late for most. Nearly 700 men perished, including the 5 Sullivan brothers. Only 10 of us were pulled from the sea alive. I was one of them. But part of me still drifts there, surrounded by the ghosts of the Juneau. 39 USS Lexington, 1942, Battle of the Coral Sea. Diary of Survivor, Lieutenant Jack Monroe, the Lexington. Lady Lex, we called her, was elegant, powerful, and beloved. On May 8, 1942, at the Coral Sea, Japanese aircraft swarmed us. Bombs and torpedoes tore into her sides. I was below deck when the first explosions hit, steel shrieking, men crushed or burned alive. We fought to save her, pumping water, containing fires, but secondary explosions rumbled through her hull. Ammunition cooked off, fire spread uncontrollably. The order came to abandon ship. I staggered topside, flames devouring everything. Planes were burning, the deck buckled, and smoke blotted out the sun. Men leapt into the sea, many still on fire. I jumped to the water, a relief and a curse. Cold, dark, slick with oil. Hours later, I watched as the Lexington exploded in a colossal fireball. Our proud ship sank beneath the waves, taking more than 200 men with her. I lived, but the grief of seeing Lady Lex consumed by fire is a wound that will never close. 40 HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Petty Officer Samuel Carter, we thought our ships. Mighty battleship Prince of Wales and battlecruiser Repulse were invincible. On December 10, 1941, off Malaya, Japanese aircraft proved us wrong. The sky filled with bombers and torpedo planes. Alarms blared, guns roared, but there were too many of them. Torpedoes slammed into our sides, one after another. The Prince of Wales shuddered, listing hard. Fires erupted. Men screamed. I ran for the lifeboats but saw chaos. Overturned craft. Shattered gear. I leaped overboard as the Repulse nearby was torn apart, her bow lifting before she slipped beneath the waves. The sea boiled with explosions, oil, and boaties. I swam, clung to wreckage, coughing oil from my lungs, watching two proud ships vanish in fire and foam. Over 800 men died that day. I survived, but the sight of those giants falling, the sound of their death, remains carved into me forever. 41. HMS Ark Royal, 1941, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Sub-Lieutenant Richard Hall, the Ark Royal was a proud carrier, a floating airfield that gave us confidence even in dark times. On November 13, 1941, we were returning from operations in the Mediterranean, the sea calm, spirits high. The ship shuddered violently, lights flickered, and water poured in. Men ran through the corridors, some trapped below as bulkheads sealed. I was thrown into a wall, stunned, ears ringing. We fought desperately to save her. Pumps roared. Damage control scrambled, but the list grew worse. Fires erupted below deck, smoke choking us. I stumbled topside, staring at the tilted flight deck, aircraft sliding dangerously toward the edge. The order to abandon ship came. I leapt into the cold water, waves crashing, oil stinging my eyes. I turned back to see Ark Royal sinking slowly, defiant until the end, her bow rising before slipping beneath the waves. She took only one man with her, but the grief of losing such a mighty ship was unbearable. I survived, but I will always remember her final groans as she was swallowed by the sea. 42. USS Hornet, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Signalman 3rd Class Thomas Reed, the Hornet carried us proudly into battle, even launching the Doolittle raid. By October 1942, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, she was under relentless Japanese attack. Explosions ripped through steel, flames devoured aircraft, torpedoes followed, slamming into her side. The Hornet shook violently, men thrown into the sea or crushed beneath twisted beams. We fought to save her, hoses, pumps, even bare hands against the flames, but she was doomed. I scrambled over burning wreckage, my uniform smoldering, until the order to abandon ship came. I dove into the Pacific, clinging to debris. From the water, I watched Hornet listing, her proud tower silhouetted against smoke and flame. She refused to sink at first, battered by hours of enemy fire before she finally slipped beneath the waves. She took over 140 men with her. I survived, but my memories are haunted by the roar of planes, the screams of the wounded, and the sight of our proud carrier, broken and burning. 43. Wilhelm Gustloff, 1945, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Nurse Helga Klein, the Gustloff, was overcrowded, filled with thousands of refugees fleeing the advancing Soviet army. Mothers clutched infants, children huddled in corners, fear palpable. That night, Soviet torpedoes struck. The ship shook violently, the lights died, and chaos erupted. Screams filled the air as people rushed for lifeboats, but there were far too few. I tried to guide children through the corridors, but panic turned people into animals. I made it to the deck, where lifeboats dangled uselessly or were crushed by the ship's list. I was forced to jump into the icy water, my breath stolen instantly. Around me, thousands thrashed, cried, or went silent. The screams still echo in my ears. I clung to wreckage, frostbite numbing my hands, watching as the Gustloff sank beneath the Baltic. Over 9,000 perished, mothers, children, soldiers. I lived, but the faces of those who froze or drowned around me are etched in my soul forever.
Page 44.
HMS Courageous, 1939, World War II. Diary of Survivor, leading seaman Arthur Doyle. We thought ourselves safe, patrolling the western approaches. The Courageous was an aircraft carrier, fast and confident. On September 17, 1939, just weeks into the war, a U-boat struck us down.
2 torpedoes ripped into her side. The explosions were deafening, steel twisting, fire spreading instantly. It was thrown to the deck, ears ringing, nose bleeding.
Men screamed below as water poured into their compartments, sealing their fate. The Courageous rolled quickly. I barely scrambled topside before she began to go under. No time for lifeboats, no time for order, just chaos. I jumped into the sea, the cold biting into me, oil stinging my eyes. She sank in 20 minutes, taking over 500 men with her. The war had only just begun, and already I had watched my ship and my friends vanish beneath the waves. 45 USS Wasp, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor, aviation mechanic William Carter. The Wasp was alive with activity on September 15, 1942, carrying planes and men into the Solomon Islands campaign. I was below deck when the torpedoes hit. The explosions shook the entire carrier, flames erupting instantly. Smoke filled the corridors, men coughing, screaming, some trapped as hatches sealed. I ran through chaos, dragging 2 men toward daylight, the heat blistering my skin. Topside the deck was ablaze. Planes fueled and armed exploded one after another, the firestorm growing. The sea itself seemed to burn as fuel spilled and ignited. I jumped overboard, hitting the water hard, coughing oil and salt. The Wasp burned for hours before she finally went under. Over 190 men were lost. I survived, but every night I dream of the flames, the screams, and the mighty Wasp crumbling into the sea. 46 USS Oklahoma, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Diary of Survivor. The ship lurched violently, alarms blaring, smoke filling the air. We scrambled to our stations, but the hits came fast, schlisted hard, rolling over in minutes. I was trapped below deck with dozens of men, the lights flickering, water rushing in. Clawed at the steel, desperate for air. I found a way through a vent, dragging myself into the burning harbor. Round me, ships blazed, men screamed, bombs fell. Oklahoma rolled completely, her hull sticking up from the water like a tombstone. Over 400 of my shipmates died. I lived, but I will never forget the sound of men pounding on steel as the water took them. 47. USS Houston, 1942, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Signalman Harold Green, the Houston, was our pride in the Pacific. On February 28, 1942, we fought in the Sunda Strait, surrounded by Japanese warships. Shells and torpedoes rained upon us. The Houston roared back, her guns blazing, but we were outnumbered. Explosions tore through the decks, fires spreading, men cut down where they stood. I relayed signals through choking smoke, the heat unbearable. The torpedoes struck home. The Houston shuddered, listed, and began to sink. Captain Rook stayed on the bridge, refusing to leave. I leapt into the dark water as she slipped under, the sea swallowing fire, steel, and men alike. Over 600 died. I was captured days later, spending years as a prisoner. But in my heart, I am still there, in the strait, watching the Houston's proud silhouette vanish into the night. 48. USS Gambier Bay, 1944, World War II. Diary of Survivor, Ensign Robert Lee, the Gambier Bay, was an escort carrier, small compared to the giants of the fleet. On October 25, 1944, off Samar, we faced the full force of the Japanese fleet. Shells rained down, water columns erupting all around us. The Gambier Bay fought back with everything she had, her small guns blazing defiantly. But against battleships and cruisers, we were fragile. Shell after shell slammed into us. Fires erupted, decks shattered, men cut down. Ran between stations, dragging wounded men, shouting orders I barely believed myself. The sea grew rough with smoke and wreckage. She rolled and sank, proud, even in death. I swam among debris, watching other escort carriers flee, some burning, some limping. Only a few of us were saved. The Gambier Bay was the only U.S. carrier sunk by naval gunfire. I was there, and I will never forget her courage. 49, USS Utah, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Diary of Survivor. Machinist's mate George Wilkins, the Utah, was an old ship, a training vessel, but she was still ours. On December 7, 1941, she took torpedo after torpedo. She capsized quickly, trapping men below deck. The ship lurched, alarms blared, and water poured in. I fought my way up, smoke choking me, men screaming around me. Some were trapped, pounding desperately on steel. I made it topside, diving into the burning harbor. Oil and fire surrounded me, the sky black with planes. I swam for my life, ears ringing, lungs burning. The Utah rolled, her hull sticking up as a tomb. She still lies there today, with more than 50 men entombed. I lived, but part of me remains trapped with them in the dark. 50 USS Laffey, 1945, World War II. The ship that would not die. Diary of Survivor, Gunner's Mate First Class Albert Jones, April 16, 1945, Okinawa. The Laffey faced the deadliest kamikaze assault I've ever seen. Wave after wave of planes screamed down on us. We fired until our guns melted, the barrels glowing red. Bombs and kamikazes slammed into the ship. Explosions ripped through the decks. Fire spread everywhere. Men were torn apart. Others burned. Some simply vanished. I kept firing, rage and terror mixing, until I was blown back by a blast. The Laffey should have sunk. She was hit 22 times, burning, twisted, nearly broken, but somehow she stayed afloat. I stumbled across her scarred deck, the smell of blood and smoke overwhelming. We lost many that day, but the Laffey survived. Scarred, battered, but alive. They called her the ship that would not die. I was proud to be one of those who lived to tell the tale. 51. USS Strong, 1943, World War II. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Joseph Kane, the Strong, was a destroyer. Lean and swift, tasked with night operations in the Solomon Islands. On July 5, 1943, we were escorting landing forces under the black sky when the sea betrayed us. Out of nowhere, a Japanese torpedo, launched from an impossible distance, found its mark. The explosion ripped into us with a force I cannot describe. Steel bent like paper, the deck heaved violently, and men were thrown overboard screaming. Water surged in immediately. I scrambled topside, choking on smoke, my hands bleeding from twisted metal. The Strong listed sharply, alarms blaring, fires raging. She sank so fast, many never escaped their compartments. I leaped into the sea, coughing, thrashing among debris. I could hear men crying for help, then silence as the dark water claimed them. Hours later, a few of us were rescued, but over 40 shipmates were gone. Strong was gone too, swallowed by the night sea. 52 USS Johnston, 1944, Battle off Samar. Diary of Survivor, Lieutenant Robert Peters. The Johnston was small compared to the giants we faced, but on October 25, 1944, she fought like a lion. Off Samar, we turned into a Japanese fleet of battleships and cruisers. Shells screamed overhead, water exploding all around. Johnston charged forward, torpedoes launching, guns blazing. Captain Evans urged us on, fearless as ever, but their firepower was overwhelming. Shells ripped through us, flames consuming compartments, men cut down instantly. I fired until the deck was too hot to stand on. Blood ran across the steel, smoke stung my eyes. The ship shook under endless hits. She began to sink, fires still burning, guns still spitting defiantly. I jumped overboard, barely avoiding the suction of her hull. Floating in the oil-slicked sea, I watched her vanish, proud even in death. Only about 140 survived out of 327. I lived, but part of me went down with the Johnston that day. 53. USS Atlanta, 1942, Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, Diary of Survivor, Ensign Harold Lang. The Atlanta fought bravely on the night of November 13, 1942. It was chaos. American and Japanese ships colliding in the darkness, searchlights cutting through smoke and fire. We fired at silhouettes in the night, and in the madness, was struck by both enemy and friendly fire. Shells tore through us, men shredded, compartments ablaze. I ran messages through smoke-choked corridors, stepping over bodies, hearing the groans of the dying. Torpedoes struck next, crippling us. Water poured in, steel screamed. The Atlanta began to die slowly, tilting into the black waves. We abandoned ship at dawn, exhausted, broken. Only a fraction of us made it out alive. The Atlanta rests now beneath Iron Bottom Sound, and I still see her in my dreams, lit by gunfire and shrouded in smoke. 54 USS Quincy, 1942, Battle of Savo Island, Diary of Survivor. Petty Officer William Harlow, the Quincy, fought desperately in the early hours of August 9, 1942. During the disaster of Savo Island, Japanese cruisers appeared out of the dark, their guns blazing, shells rained down like thunder, explosions tearing our ship apart. Fires spread instantly, compartments collapsing, men screaming in agony. I helped carry wounded shipmates, but the deck was slick with blood and oil. Torpedoes slammed into us, lifting the ship, nearly breaking her apart. Quincy was ablaze, her guns silenced one by one. I jumped into the sea as she sank beneath me, her burning superstructure sliding below the waves. I survived, but I can still feel the heat of that burning deck under my hands. 55. HMS Exeter, 1942, Java Sea. Diary of Survivor, Midshipman Edward Collins. The Exeter had fought at the River Plate. But by March 1, 1942, she was battered and alone in the Java Sea. Japanese cruisers closed in, shells striking us relentlessly. Fires erupted, water surged into the hull, the deck littered with wounded and dead. I manned a gun until the heat burned my skin, until there was nothing left to fire. Exeter shuddered under another torpedo strike. The order came to abandon ship, leapt into the boiling sea, waves red with blood, oil choking my lungs. Around me men thrashed, some sinking silently. We were picked up and became prisoners of war. Many never returned. The Exeter went down with honor, and I still hear her guns in my dreams. 56. USS Helena, 1943, Battle of Kula Gulf. Diary of Survivor, Fire Controlman Jack Lewis on July 6, 1943. The Helena fought in the black waters of Kula Gulf. We rained shells upon the enemy, lighting the night with fire. Then the torpedoes came. The first hit threw me against a bulkhead, ears ringing. Two more followed, tearing us apart. Fire spread instantly, water flooding below. Men were cut off, trapped, their screams muffled as compartments filled. The Helena broke apart. I leapt into the sea, clinging to wreckage, the night alive with explosions and cries. Hours passed in the freezing water, sharks circling, men vanishing. Rescue came for some of us, but over 160 never made it. The Helena rests in those dark waters, and part of me rests with her. 57. HMS Repulse, 1941. Sinking of Force Z. Diary of Survivor. Leading Seaman Peter Grant. On December 10, 1941, the Repulse and Prince of Wales steamed proudly off Malaya. We thought our guns could hold off anything. Then the Japanese planes came. Oh, bombs fell like rain, torpedoes streaking across the waves. I manned an anti-aircraft gun, firing desperately as planes screamed past. Then the torpedoes struck. The Repulse shuddered violently, listing hard. Fires erupted, smoke choking us. The order to abandon ship came too late for many. I dove into the sea as she rolled, her bow lifting before vanishing beneath the waves. Over 500 shipmates were gone. I survived, but the sound of her death knell still echoes in my chest. 58 USS Northampton, 1942, Battle of Tassafaronga. Diary of Survivor. Seaman First Class Daniel Moore, on November 30th, 1942. In the dark waters off Guadalcanal, the Northampton fought with everything she had. Torpedoes streaked in silently. One struck near my station, throwing me into a bulkhead, ears ringing, chest burning. The ship listed immediately, water flooding in. I stumbled topside, smoke choking me, men crying out in terror. The order to abandon ship came as she rolled. I leaped into the Black Sea, salt burning my wounds, oil coating my skin. From the water, I watched the Northampton vanish beneath the waves. Over 50 were lost that night. I lived, but I carried the image of her burning deck in my nightmares. 59 USS Vincennes, 1942, Battle of Savo Island, Diary of Survivor, Chief Petty Officer Thomas Walsh. The Vincennes was proud, unprepared for the night of August 9th, 1942. Japanese cruisers struck with precision, shells ripping into us mercilessly. The ship erupted with fire. I ran through corridors of smoke and flame, men screaming, steel collapsing. Torpedoes followed, lifting her from the water, tearing through compartments. I barely escaped, diving into the oily waves. The Vincennes burned as she sank, her proud silhouette disappearing into the dark. Over 300 of my brothers were lost. I survived, but I still see the flames reflected on the water every night I close my eyes. 60 USS Chicago, 1943, Battle of Rennell Island, Diary of Survivor. Bosun's mate Patrick O'Neill, on January 29, 1943, Japanese aircraft swarmed us near Rennell Island. Bombs and torpedoes rained down. Chicago shuddered under repeated hits, fire and smoke pouring from her hull. We fought to keep her afloat, but she was mortally wounded. The order to abandon ship came. I clambered over the side, diving into dark, oily water, the heat of flames searing my back. From the sea, I watched her sink slowly, explosions marking her death. Over 60 men were gone. I lived, but the image of Chicago slipping beneath the waves will never leave me. 61 USS Indianapolis, 1945. Diary of Survivor, Seaman, 2nd Class Harold Bray. The Indianapolis was our pride, fast and powerful. We had just delivered parts for the atomic bomb to Tinian, but none of us knew what cargo we'd carried. On July 30th, 1945, as we crossed the Philippine Sea, 2 Japanese torpedoes slammed into us in the dead of night. The explosions were deafening. Bulkheads collapsed, compartments flooded instantly. Fire roared across the deck as ammunition cooked off. Men screamed in the dark as the ship rolled violently, throwing hundreds into the black water. Within minutes, the Indy was gone, swallowed whole by the sea. Nearly 900 of us were left floating, scattered, clinging to debris, life jackets barely keeping us afloat. For days, the sun beat down mercilessly. Thirst drove men insane. Some drank seawater and died screaming. And then came the sharks. They circled in packs, striking without warning. I watched friends dragged under the water foaming red. Thea's screams haunt me more than anything. We were finally spotted by a passing plane, but by then, only 316 of us remained alive out of nearly 1,200. I survived. 62. HMS Ark Royal, 1941. Diary of Survivor. Sub-Lieutenant David Hughes, the Ark Royal was a mighty carrier, proud of her role in chasing the Bismarck. On November 13, 1941, we steamed confidently through the Mediterranean when disaster struck. A single torpedo from a lurking U-boat tore into our side. At first it seemed minor, but within minutes, water rushed in faster than we could control. The deck tilted, men scrambling, alarms blaring. I was below when the list became unbearable. We scrambled topside, smoke and steam choking us, lifeboats crashing into the sea. The Ark Royal groaned as she settled, her once-proud flight deck sliding into the waves. I dove into the oily water, salt stinging my eyes. Looking back, I saw her bow rise briefly before vanishing beneath the Mediterranean. She took only one man with her, but the loss cut deep. For me, it was like watching the heart of our fleet drown. 63 HMS Hood. 1941, Battle of Denmark Strait, Diary of Survivor. The mighty Hood. On May 24, 1941, we charged against the German battleship Bismarck. We thought ourselves untouchable. The first shells whistled past, geysers of water erupting. Then, one shell found us. It struck amidships. In an instant, the ship exploded with a roar that split the heavens. Fire and steel shot skyward. I was thrown into the freezing sea, deaf, stunned, gasping for breath. I surfaced to see the Hood gone. Vanished in seconds. Over 1,400 of my shipmates had been obliterated. Only 2 others and I lived. I floated in silence, numb, the image of her fiery end seared forever into my mind. She was more than a ship. She was our pride. To see her destroyed so suddenly was like losing a family in the blink of an eye. WASP 64. USS Wasp, 1942. Guadalcanal Campaign. Diary of Survivor, Lieutenant George Davidson. On September 15, 1942. The Wasp patrolled near Guadalcanal, her decks busy with aircraft. The day was calm, uneventful, until torpedoes struck. The explosions ripped through us with ferocity. Fire spread instantly, fuel igniting in violent bursts. The heat was unbearable. Men ran, clothes aflame, screaming. Compartments collapsed, trapping dozens. I fought my way topside through corridors filled with smoke and flame. The order to abandon ship was given. I leapt into the Pacific, the heat of burning fuel on the water singeing my skin. From the sea, I watched the Wasp consumed by fire, her proud hull engulfed, her crew leaping into the oily waves. Over 190 men died. She was scuttled hours later. Her loss left a hole in our fleet, and in my heart. I will never forget the sight of her burning decks, nor the cries of men who never made it off. 65. USS Hornet, 1942. Battle of Santa Cruz. Diary of Survivor. Ensign Charles White. The Hornet had carried the Doolittle Raiders. We thought her charmed. On October 26, 1942, at Santa Cruz, the skies filled with Japanese aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes rained down. Explosions tore through the flight deck. Aircraft hurled like toys, fires raging uncontrollably. The deck buckled beneath my feet, smoke filling my lungs. We fought desperately to save her, but more planes came. With no hope left, we abandoned ship. I slid down ropes into the Black Sea, the water cold and choking. Hours later, I watched as torpedoes from our own destroyers sank her to prevent capture. Over 100 shipmates were gone. I lived, but watching her deliberate destruction felt like losing a loved one all over again. 66. HMS Glorious, 1940 Norway Campaign. Diary of Survivor, able seaman. Frank Wade, the Glorious was an aircraft carrier, and we thought we were safe under her wings. On June 8, 1940, in the Norwegian Sea, German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau found us. We had no air patrol aloft, no warning. Suddenly, shells rained down. The first struck our flight deck, erupting in fire. Men ran in chaos and consumed instantly. More shells followed, ripping us apart, our hangars blazing infernos. I crawled through smoke-filled passageways, skin burning, ears deafened. The order to abandon ship came, but lifeboats were destroyed. I leaped into the freezing water, clinging to debris. Hours dragged by. Hypothermia claimed many. Out of 1,500 aboard, fewer than 50 survived. I was among them. But the Glorious still burns in my nightmares, her flight deck collapsing in fire. On June 4, 1942, Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes swarmed us. Bombs tore into the deck, men incinerated instantly. Then torpedoes struck, flooding us, the ship listing hard. We abandoned ship, but she refused to die. Days later, submarines finished her with another torpedo barrage. I remember clinging to wreckage, watching her smolder, her once proud hull slipping beneath the waves. Over 140 of my brothers went with her. I survived, but the Yorktown's death was like watching hope itself sink. 68. HMS Royal Oak, 1939, Scapa Flow. Diary of Survivor. Boy Seaman Albert Brown. I was only 17, barely a man, aboard the battleship Royal Oak. On October 14, 1939, anchored at Scapa Flow, I thought we were safe. Then the torpedoes struck. The explosions tore the night apart. Compartments flooded instantly, men trapped, pounding on bulkheads as the sea rushed in. The ship listed sharply. I scrambled through smoke and panic, tripping over bodies in the dark. I made it topside just as she rolled. I leaped into the freezing water, lungs burning, ears filled with the screams of my shipmates. Out of 1,200 aboard, more than 830 were lost. I survived, but I still feel the cold water in my bones. and the weight of being one of the few to escape. 69 USS Gambier Bay, 1944, Battle off Samar. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Apprentice Billy Roberts. The Gambier Bay was an escort carrier, not meant to fight giants. But on October 25, 1944, she faced battleships head-on. Shells ripped into us, steel bending, fires erupting. Our planes tried desperately to fight back, but we were hopelessly outgunned. I manned a hose, trying to douse flames, when another shell smashed into the hangar, hurling me into the deck. The order came to abandon ship. I jumped into the boiling sea, watching the Gambier Bayliston roll, her hull disappearing beneath angry waves. Out of 900 aboard, nearly 130 never returned. I lived, but the image of her gallant, hopeless stand against impossible odds is carved into my soul. 70. HMS Courageous, 1939. Diary of Survivor, Signalman John Taylor. On September 17, 1939, only weeks into the war, the carrier Courageous patrolled the Atlantic. We felt untouchable until the U-29 struck. 2 torpedoes slammed into our side. The explosions echoed like thunder, compartments collapsing instantly.
Ow.
Men were trapped below, pounding on steel as the water rushed in. The ship listed so quickly, there was no time. I scrambled topside, leapt into the cold Atlantic, barely avoiding the suction as she went down in minutes. Over 500 men were lost. I survived, but the shock of seeing such a mighty ship vanish so suddenly still chills me. 71. USS Houston, 1942. Battle of Sunda Strait, Diary of Survivor. Seaman First Class Raymond Kester, on the night of February 28, 1942. The Houston sailed with pride, her flag still flying after so many desperate fights. Alongside the Australian cruiser Perth, we entered Sunda Strait, unaware that a Japanese fleet was waiting. Searchlights stabbed through the night, and then the sea erupted. Shells rained down, torpedoes streaked toward us. The first explosion knocked me to the deck, my ears ringing. Flames spread quickly, smoke filling every corridor. We fought desperately, but we were outnumbered and outgunned. I manned a gun until the heat blistered my skin, until there were no more shells to fire. Then came the final torpedoes. The Houston groaned, listing her mighty guns silenced. I jumped into the black water, choking on oil, clinging to wreckage as she slipped beneath the waves. Of over 1,000 aboard, only 368 survived, many captured and forced into brutal captivity. I lived, but part of me will always be on that burning deck. 72. HMS Cornwall, 1942. Indian Ocean Raid. Diary of Survivor, Petty Officer James Douglas. On April 5, 1942, Cornwall patrolled the Indian Ocean with the Dorsetshire. When Japanese carriers launched their fury, the sky filled with aircraft, bombs whistling down. The first struck aft, flames erupting, men thrown like ragdolls. More bombs followed, tearing into the deck, fire spreading uncontrollably. I remember running through corridors of smoke, my lungs burning, ears ringing with the roar of explosions. The Cornwall listed hard, her steel groaning. The order to abandon ship came. I leapt into the boiling sea, salt stinging my eyes, the cries of drowning men around me. From the water I watched her sink slowly, her stern lifting before sliding beneath. Over 400 men were gone. I survived, but I still dream of that sky filled with screaming planes. 73 USS O'Brien, 1942, Pacific Ocean, Diary of Survivor. Machinist mate Charles Wainwright, the O'Brien, was struck on September 15, 1942. When a torpedo meant for the carrier Wasp found us instead, the explosion tore into our bow, but somehow we stayed afloat. For weeks we limped along, patching her up, praying she'd hold. But the sea is merciless. On October 19th, the strain was too much. The O'Brien buckled and broke apart. I scrambled topside, leapt into the Pacific as the bow sank first, dragging the rest with it. The suction nearly pulled me under. I surfaced, coughing, clinging to wreckage, watching her final plunge. We had thought we'd cheated death, but the O'Brien claimed her due. I lived, but the slow death of that ship is etched into me. Die. 74 HMS Fiji, 1941, Battle of Crete. Diary of Survivor, able seaman, Colin Hughes. On May 22, 1941, The Fiji steamed proudly off Crete, her guns blazing at waves of German aircraft. Hour after hour, the sky filled with Stuka's diving bombs screaming down. We shot many from the sky, but eventually, our luck ran out. A bomb tore through the deck, fire roaring. Another followed, lifting me off my feet, hurling me into twisted steel. The Fiji listed fires raging, men scrambled, wounded, dragged by comrades. I remember the sound of men screaming in the flames, a sound that has never left me. Order to abandon ship came. I leapt into the sea, watching her roll and sink, her proud hull sliding beneath the waves. Over 240 men were gone. I survived. But the smell of burning flesh and oil clings to me still. 75. USS Neosho, 1942. Battle of the Coral Sea. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Second Class Paul Kramer, the Neosho, was an oiler, never meant for battle. May 7, 1942, Japanese aircraft mistook us for a carrier. Bombs fell like rain, explosions tearing us apart. Flames roared through the ship. Men burned alive, others blown into the sea. I fought to douse fires, but the heat was unbearable. When the deck collapsed beneath me, I crawled to the rail and jumped. I clung to wreckage for days. The sun burned us by day, the cold froze us by night. Sharks circled, dragging men screaming beneath the waves. Out of hundreds, only a few dozen of us survived until rescue. I survived, but the memory of their cries will never fade. 76. HMS Dorsetshire, 1942. Indian Ocean Raid. Diary of Survivor, leading stoker Alan Price, alongside the Cornwall. The Dorsetshire faced the fury of Japanese aircraft on April 5, 1942. The bombs came in waves, tearing through us mercilessly. I was below when the first struck, flames and smoke filling the engine room. We scrambled topside, eyes burning, ears deafened. The deck was a slaughterhouse. Men burned, torn apart, screaming for help. The order to abandon ship came. From the water, I saw the Dorsetshire roll and vanish beneath the waves. Over 230 men were lost. I survived, but that day, I learned the terror of facing death from above. 77. USS Juneau, 1942. Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Diary of Survivor. Seaman Fireman Fred Dixon, on November 13, 1942. The Juneau limped away from battle, her hull already battered. Then a torpedo struck. The explosion was instant, catastrophic. The Juneau vanished in seconds. I was hurled into the air, crashing into the sea. When I surfaced, she was gone. Hundreds of men swallowed instantly. The cries of the wounded filled the night, then silence. We drifted for days, exposed to sun and sharks. Thirst drove some mad. Most never made it. Only a handful of us survived out of nearly 700. I was one of them. But the ghosts of the Juneau drift beside me still. 78. HMS Edinburgh, 1942. Arctic Convoys. Diary of Survivor. Gunner William Foster, the Arctic was cruel enough without enemy torpedoes. On April 30th, 1942, the cruiser Edinburgh was struck. The explosion twisted steel, water flooding in. We fought to keep her afloat in the freezing seas, but another torpedo finished her. I was thrown into the icy water, my body instantly numb. I clawed for wreckage, the cold cutting deeper than any blade. I was hauled into a lifeboat, half dead, my skin blue. Over 150 were lost to those freezing waters. The Edinburgh went down, carrying her gold cargo and my shipmates. 79. USS Meredith, 1942. Guadalcanal, Diary of Survivor. Boatswain's mate Harry Wilcox, the Meredith steamed bravely with supplies, but on October 15, 1942, Japanese bombers found us. Bomb after bomb struck. Fires erupted, compartments collapsed, men torn apart. I was hurled into the sea, clinging to wreckage. The Meredith broke in too, vanishing into the deep. We floated for days, sun burning us, sharks circling. Men slipped away one by one, the oar screams ending suddenly. Out of over 270, fewer than 80 survived. I lived, but every night I see the fire, hear the cries of those dragged under. Mess Barham, 1941. Mediterranean Diary of Survivor. Stoker James Marshall, on November 25, 1941, the battleship Barham steamed proudly through the Mediterranean. Suddenly, torpedoes from a U-boat struck. The ship listed fires raging. I scrambled topside, smoke choking me, men screaming. Then the magazines exploded. A massive fireball erupted, hurling me into the sea. When I surfaced, the Barham was gone. Over 800 men with her. Only a few of us survived. I lived, but I will never escape the sight of her fiery end. 81, USS Peary, 1942, Darwin bombing, Diary of Survivor, Airman Thomas Riley on February 19, 1942. We were anchored at Darwin. When the sky darkened with Japanese planes, the air filled with the shriek of bombs. One struck near the bow, another amidships. The Peary shuddered violently, flames roaring upward. Men were thrown into the sea, others burned alive. I scrambled to the deck, smoke choking my lungs, ears ringing from the concussions. Torpedoes from aircraft followed, tearing holes in her side. She listed quickly, sinking beneath the chaos of fire and smoke. Out of 148 men, only a handful of us survived. Darwin burned around us, but I remember only the screams of my shipmates cut short as the sea claimed them. 82, HMS Royal, 1941, Mediterranean Diary of Survivor, aircraft handler Peter Morris. We'd all believe the Royal untouchable. On November 13, 1941, a torpedo slammed into her starboard side. At first, the damage seemed minor, but water rushed in faster than pumps could manage. Below decks, men struggled against rising black water, trapped as compartments sealed. I scrambled topside, the list becoming more severe by the minute. We abandoned ship in orderly silence, but the fear was thick. From the lifeboat, I watched her proud hull roll over, her flight deck slipping beneath the Mediterranean. She sank slowly, like a wounded giant, unwilling to fall. She took only one man with her, but the sight of such a mighty ship sliding into the sea felt like the death of an empire. 83, USS Princeton, 1944, Battle of Leyte Gulf, Diary of Survivor. Lieutenant Commander Alan Scott on October 24, 1944. We were in the thick of battle when a single bomb from a Japanese dive bomber struck the Princeton S deck. The explosion triggered a chain of horrors. Fires roared through hangars, fuel tanks erupted, planes exploded where they sat. Men were incinerated instantly. I crawled across the deck, skin blistering, ears deafened by the blasts. We tried to contain the inferno, but the ship became a floating firestorm. Hours later, secondary explosions tore her apart. I was thrown overboard, clinging to wreckage as the Princeton's burning silhouette vanished beneath clouds of black smoke. Over 100 men died. I survived, but the smell of burning steel and flesh haunts me still. 84, HMS Eagle, 1942, Malta Convoys, Diary of Survivor, Midshipman Edward Clark on August 11, 1942. During Operation Pedestal, the Eagle steamed proudly when 4 torpedoes from a U-boat struck in rapid succession. The ship heaved violently. Fires erupted, steel splitting with thunderous cracks. Within minutes, she rolled onto her side. I scrambled topside, men leaping into the sea all around me. I jumped too, the Mediterranean swallowing me. When I surfaced, the Eagle was gone. Sunk in less than 10 minutes, over 130 men were lost. I floated among wreckage, staring at the spot where she'd stood minutes before. It felt as though the sea had swallowed a piece of my very soul. 85, USS Liscombe, 1943, Gilbert Islands. Diary of Survivor, Seaman Apprentice Robert Diaz. The Liscombe was an escort carrier, small but proud. November 24, 1943, a torpedo from a Japanese submarine struck us near the stern. The explosion ripped through our bomb magazine. In an instant, the ship erupted in a colossal fireball. Steel bent, flames roared, men vanished in the blast. I was thrown into the sea, half-conscious, ears bleeding. When I surfaced, the Liscombe was already gone, replaced by fire and smoke. Out of 916 men, more than 600 perished. I survived, but the image of that single, monstrous explosion, the ship consumed in seconds, will never leave me. 86 HMS Neptune, 1941, Mediterranean Diary of Survivor, Stoker Second Class Jack Anderson. On December 19, 1941, the Neptune struck an Italian mine off Tripoli. The explosion ripped through her hull, flooding compartments instantly. As rescue attempts began, she struck more mines. Each blast shook us to the core, men screaming, compartments collapsing. Water rushed in, the ship breaking apart beneath our feet. I leapt into the Mediterranean as the Neptune capsized. The water was freezing, oil burning on the surface. I clung to wreckage, teeth chattering, lungs burning. Nearly 800 men, only one survived. And it wasn't me. I write these words as if from beyond, because the Neptune took me to 87, USS Shaw, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Diary of Survivor. Gunner's Mate Henry Blake, on December 7th, 1941, at Pearl Harbor. I stood at my station when bombs struck the Shaw. The forward magazine erupted in a massive fireball, the bow blown apart. I was hurled to the deck, flames licking at my skin, ears ringing with the roar of the blast. Men were incinerated instantly, others blown into the harbor. I crawled through twisted steel, diving overboard into oily water, coughing and gasping. From the harbor, I saw the Shaw engulfed in flame, her bow a mangled ruin. Miraculously, she did not sink, but that day claimed over 20 of my shipmates. I survived, but I can never forget the sight of her burning silhouette. 88, HMS Ark Royal Swordfish Pilots. 1941, Bismarck Hunt. Diary of Survivor. Pilot Sublieutenant Michael Ford, we launched from the Ark Royal on May 26, 1941. Our Swordfish biplanes fragile against the Atlantic's fury. The mission: stop the Bismarck. Anti-aircraft fire lit the sky. Shells burst around us, tracer fire slicing through the clouds. My plane shook violently, canvas ripping, the engine screaming. We pressed on, torpedoes away. I saw one strike home, crippling the Bismarck's rudder. We turned for home, but flak found us. My plane went down in the icy Atlantic. I scrambled into a dinghy watching the Ark Royal's silhouette far away. I survived, but I will never forget the sound of shells ripping the air, or the sight of the Bismarck turning helplessly in circles. 89, USS Astoria, 1942, Battle of Savo Island. Diary of Survivor Ensign Carl Mitchell, on August 9, 1942. The Astoria fought desperately in the chaos of Savo Island. Japanese shells tore into us, explosions rocking the ship, compartments ablaze. I ran messages through choking smoke, ears ringing with the roar of our guns. Then a torpedo struck, steel bending, men hurled into flames. The deck tilted, fires raging uncontrollably. The order to abandon ship came too late for many. I leapt into the sea, the water black with oil, my heart breaking as the Astoria rolled and slid beneath the waves. Over 200 men were lost. I survived, but her burning silhouette is carved forever into my mind. HMS Glorious Destroyer Escorts, 1940, Norway. Diary of Survivor Able Seaman Arthur Bell, the Glorious, wasn't alone that day. Her escorts, Ardent and Acosta, fought to the death against impossible odds. When German battleships opened fire, the destroyers charged. Torpedoes streaked out, shells rained down. I was aboard Acosta, manning a gun. We fired until the deck ran red with blood, until the barrels glowed. Then a shell found us. The Acosta erupted in fire, men screaming, steel collapsing. I was hurled into the freezing sea, clinging to wreckage as she broke apart. Both destroyers were lost, along with nearly all hands. I lived, but the courage of those men, charging giants with pea shooters, will stay with me until my dying breath. 91. USS Indianapolis, 1945, Pacific Ocean, Diary of Survivor. Seaman Second Class Harold Bray, July 30th, 1945. The night our world ended. The explosions ripped the ship apart. Within minutes, she was going down. Hundreds of us floated together, clinging to rafts and wreckage. They circled in silence, then struck suddenly, dragging men under as screams pierced the night. Days blurred. Thirst drove some mad. I watched friends drink salt water, their eyes rolling before they slipped away. The sun burned us, the nights froze us, and every hour more men disappeared. Out of nearly 1,200 aboard, only 316 survived. I was one of them. But I've never escaped the cries in the night, or the endless sound of fins cutting the water around me. 92. HMS Courageous, 1939, North Atlantic, Diary of Survivor. Leading Airman Philip Turner, September 17, 1939. Just weeks into the war, the Courageous patrolled proudly, The shock threw me from my station, alarms blaring, men shouting orders drowned by the rush of flooding water. The Courageous listed violently, fires erupting across her decks. I clawed my way topside, smoke stinging my eyes. The ship was already doomed. I jumped, the freezing Atlantic swallowing me whole. I was one of the lucky few pulled from the icy water. But the memory of that swift, merciless sinking has never left me. 93. USS Jacob Jones, 1942, North Atlantic. Diary of Survivor, Ensign Walter Mitchell. February 28, 1942, the Jacob Jones steamed through the gray Atlantic when a German U-boat struck. Torpedoes ripped into our side, explosions deafening, fire and water tearing through compartments. The destroyer shuddered, buckling beneath our feet. Men screamed, flames roared, and then the order came. Abandon ship. I jumped, the freezing sea like knives cutting my flesh. From the water I saw her break apart, bow and stern rising like grasping hands before plunging beneath the waves. Oil spread across the surface, flames dancing upon it, men crying out for help that never came. Out of more than 150, only a handful survived. 94. HMS Repulse, 1941, South China Sea. Diary of Survivor. Petty Officer George Langley, December 10th, 1941. We sailed alongside the Prince of Wales, proud and fearless. Then the sky filled with Japanese bombers. Bombs and torpedoes struck relentlessly. I remember the first torpedo slamming into Repulse's side. The deck shuddered. Men hurled from their posts. More followed, tearing her open, water rushing in like a beast unleashed. But the sea was merciless. I leapt into the oil-slicked water, clinging to wreckage as the cries of drowning men echoed around me. Out of nearly 1,300, over 500 were lost. I lived, but the sound of bombs whistling down still haunts me. 95. USS Wasp, 1942, Solomon Islands, Diary of Survivor. The explosion tore through her side, fuel igniting in a firestorm. Flames roared through the hangars, ammunition cooked off in deafening blasts. Men were incinerated instantly. I crawled through smoke, lungs burning, ears ringing, skin blistering. The order to abandon ship came too late for many. I jumped. The sea a hell of burning oil. I swam through fire, choking on smoke, until a destroyer pulled me aboard. I survived, but I can never close my eyes without seeing her burning silhouette. 96. HMS Sheffield, 1941. Mediterranean Diary of Survivor. Seaman Jack Holmes, during the Malta convoys. The Sheffield took relentless punishment. On November 25, 1941, Italian aircraft found us. Bombs struck close aboard, explosions lifting me from the deck. The Sheffield fought back fiercely, but she was bleeding badly. I manned a hose, trying to douse flames, but smoke blinded me, heat blistered my face. Finally, the order came. Abandon ship. I leaped into the sea, coughing, clinging to wreckage as she slipped beneath the Mediterranean waves. Out of hundreds, only a fraction survived. I was one, but I left most of my heart behind with her. 97. USS Hornet, 1942, Battle of Santa Cruz. Diary of Survivor. Signalman Charles Weber, October 26, 1942. The Hornet fought bravely, planes roaring off her deck, guns firing until barrels glowed. Then bombs struck. The deck heaved violently, fires raging. Another bomb tore into her hangar, the explosion deafening. I was thrown from my station, crawling through choking smoke. She fought for hours, but more bombs and torpedoes finished her. The Hornet burned, listing heavily. I abandoned ship, sliding into the sea, salt stinging my wounds. From the water, I watched her slip beneath the waves, her proud flight deck the last to vanish. Over 140 men were gone. 98. HMS Prince of Wales, 1941, South China Sea. Diary of Survivor, Midshipman David Thompson. We steamed with the Repulse. When Japanese aircraft found us, torpedoes struck, explosions tearing the great battleship apart. Water flooded quickly, her massive hull groaning. I scrambled topside, slipping on blood-slick steel. The Prince of Wales listed heavily, her fate sealed. I leapt into the sea, the cries of drowning men around me. From the water, I watched her proud hull roll, then plunge beneath the waves. Over 300 were lost. I lived, but I will never escape the sight of Britain's pride brought low by torpedoes from the sky. Boatswain's Mate Samuel Parker, June 4th, 1942. The Yorktown fought fiercely at Midway, planes roaring off her deck. Then bombs and torpedoes struck. The ship shook violently, fires raging, compartments flooding. We worked tirelessly to save her, but she was mortally wounded. I manned a hose until flames forced me back. The order came. Abandoned ship. I leaped into the Pacific, waves crashing over me as the Yorktown slipped beneath. I survived, but Midway's victory was paid in blood. 100 HMS Hood, 1941, Denmark Strait. Diary of Survivor, Midshipman Ted Briggs, May 24th, 1941. The pride of the Royal Navy faced the Bismarck. Shells roared across the waves, the sea shuddering with each impact. Then, a shell from the Bismarck pierced our deck. The explosion ripped through the magazines. In an instant, the hood erupted in a fireball. I was hurled into the icy Atlantic, the force of the blast tearing men apart around me. When I surfaced, the hood was gone. Out of 1,418 men, only 3 of us survived. I was one of them. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the mysteries of the sea. If you enjoyed this tale of shipwreck and survival, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a story from Lost at Sea Tales. Until next time, may the winds be steady, and may you never find yourself lost at sea.